Welcome to our discussion for production processes, chapter 12 from your course textbook. So let's get started. So in this lecture, we're going to be talking about the aspects of the process of production and what we consider we might need to go through when producing a line, and then, intending to sell that in a market. So some considerations for this include uh, aspects to which vendors you're going to ultimately work with. And so a lot of that is influenced based on what the vendor can produce, what they can make, the influence of the environment in which they operate within. And this can vary greatly, simply because operating, say, in a country like China might have, um, advanced technology capabilities in terms of their production processes, that might look very different, say, going into a country like India. And some big things to consider when you think about where you're going to produce. A lot of it is going to be based on the level of technology, how available that is. What does their infrastructure look like based on, technology? Do they have accessible and working Wi-Fi? What are their information systems that they're operating within, and how does that correlate to information flow of goods through the supply chain? Beyond that, also considering the price that you might have to pay. Excuse me for just a second. I'm kind of getting over a cold this week, so I apologize for the abrupt pause in the lecture. If I do need to do that again, it's because I'm coughing and I don't want to have that on the recording. So again, apologies ahead of time. So again, thinking about the price that you're going to pay. So here we're looking at cost of materials, labor, and transportation cost. A lot of those come into play in terms of considerations for pricing. And then, of course, the price that will be uh, in turn reflective in the overall cost that a brand will pay, um, based on where they're producing from. And so when you think about the onslaught of, capitalistic mindset, and hence why we look at the apparel industry from a more broader sense of understanding, we can see where a lot of manufacturing has gone into other parts of the world because it simply is so much cheaper to produce, um, for a greater level of units, and production, to serve a greater level of demand in the marketplace. And that's, so much more significantly beneficial to brands that are looking at profit as their, main goal in this reasoning. Any brand that's, working with more of a mass market, outlook. And so that's something to be aware of. And then, of course, the geographic location of where you're producing your products. And then, of course, that plays into transportation. So if you're looking at, an international market, where in proximity are they to your ultimate customer? And how quickly can you get your product, ready to market and sold in the greater market? And so When you think about that aspect of it, it also can influence your consideration of who you go with. One thing that's interesting too is in a greater conversation is all of this is related to what we consider a uh, global supply chain. Every brand that operates has some sort of supply chain that they are affiliated with that gets their product made and distributed to their customer on time. So we see continual developments in each of these areas, whether it be technology, pricing, as well as the location of production. And a lot of this is influenced by, uh, information technology around PLM systems, PDM systems, ERP solutions, which are heavily influenced within supply chain operations to ensure greater flexibility and greater distribution of flow of goods throughout. Another aspect to production and just overall, uh, distribution and producing is a concept called lean manufacturing. And here, we're looking at how can we streamline and kind of cut the fat off of our production processes so that we can eliminate as much overhead costs, perhaps carbon emission, influence, production, waste, all of these things. And so it's an approach where we achieve the shortest possible cycle time um, by eliminating process waste. So not just product waste, but process waste. So sort of like leaning out like you would if you were thinking about, how can you cut some of the fat in and become more lean. And really it aligns with more agility within a supply chain. So the benefits of lean manufacturing are a greater emphasis on production costs to lower them, being able to increase the level of output, and having shorter lead times because you're basically making shorter runs of everything, which is great because it leans everything out and you don't have these big, bulky orders that are cyclical throughout the season. Some different environments that we see within manufacturing is, widely across all markets is going to be producing for mass. So mass market. So when we think about mass production, we're thinking about the capitalizing on economies of scale. So how can I produce? How can I standardize so that I am producing enough based on the demand of the market? Uh, a mass production type of outlook in terms of sourcing is suitable for, uh, standardization of cutting and sewing, constructing very large quantities of product because you're focusing on the mass market. So pretty much everyone. Considering that most brands fall within this kind of strata of business strategy, we can see how, brands at almost every price zone kind of fit within this mass production kind of sourcing strategy overall. However, as we've seen in the last decade, 2 decades rather, the emergence of fast fashion, where we kind of speed up this understanding of mass production by creating shorter cycles within mass production. And this is better suited for more trendy, fashion forward types of products where you have shorter selling seasons with no intention of replenishment. And I'm sure, as you consider the term fast fashion, you can think of some relatively major brands that kind of fit within this scope of definition, such as H&M, Zara, Forever 21, Shein, Temu. These are some of the larger, well-known, fast speed to market types of companies today. And then the emergence of something else kind of segueing from fast fashion, which is mass customization, where brands are realizing that customers are getting tired of product that is accessible to everyone and, affordable for everyone. And so a way to connect with consumers and still appeal to their buyer behavior and really speak to them as an individual consumer as opposed to them being a part of a major consumer group. We see benefiting factors kind of come into play, such as customization of fit, customization of design, or even personalization of an actual product. A really good example of this, you can look at companies like Nike or Adidas, where they allow a customer to basically customize their own shoe. And in actuality, the customer feels as though that shoe they've designed for themselves. But what they don't realize is that on the back end, they are still ordering from what's considered a template. And that template is a certain type of shoe design. You get to pick your materials. You pick your shoelace color, the outsole, the insole, textile. If it's going to be a knit, a stretch knit, or if it's going to be, excuse me, something more structured. And then the color variation across, and then also the sole of it. Like, what is the sole shape? Um, and the shoe type. So at the end of the design of it, the customer, again, like I said, feels as though they've designed their own shoe, but in actuality, the brand itself is still mass producing, but giving the customer the option to make choices. So this kind of plays into the psychology of the consumer a little bit more, which is shaping a lot of interest in the market in today's modern market, so to speak. All right, so let's kind of move into the discussion around the process of production. When we think about construction, the overall making of the product, and whether that product is a shoe, a purse, a piece of clothing. And excuse me again, I need to mute myself for just a second. Okay, thank you. So, when we think about construction systems, there are three main types that we see in mass-produced markets across the globe. The first being a single hand system. This is reserved more for couture or higher priced, high fashion goods, where the merchandise is produced by a single individual and they make the entire garment themselves. It's not necessarily in a big manufacturing facility. You see these in more of the ateliers in regions around the world that focus on couture production. And if you watch some of the high fashion documentaries, you can see examples of this where they have their own in-house production facilities, their design ateliers, and they are solely designated for the couture market. And again, it's a single hand system, so you probably have one or two, maybe three seamstresses working on a single garment for an entire collection for that couture house. When we transfer that to more of a mass way of producing, we see examples where oftentimes it's what's used as consideration of progressive bundle system, where you will produce and bundle your pieces. So you will lay out the fabric, you'll cut the pattern pieces, and then they'll bundle them and then put them into carts. And then there'll be a single sewing machine operator that will handle one section of the producing of that garment, and then it'll be passed on to another, and so on and so forth until the garment is finished. A term that's often used and tracked when you think about time and action calendars, when we're thinking about the rate at which it takes a single operator or a single bundle system to make a particular style. It's called WIP, which is work in process. So when you have large bundles of work per operator, this is how they are tracked, and this is what equates to the cost of labor when you break down your order contract with a particular production facility. And then finally, we have flexible manufacturing systems where it can be anything from a more modular manufacturing type of operation, a self-directed work team, compact production work teams, or even more flexible work groups. When we look at unit production systems, UPS, they have parts that are fed on an overhead conveyor, and you can kind of see that here in this image where you have your sewing operator. They will hang their finished part, and then it'll be sent to another operator, so on and so forth until the garment is completed. And so it creates more of an efficient way of producing items at a faster rate, especially when you're considering mass production. And like I said, the equation of the labor costs associated with that. Another consideration within manufacturing that shows up a lot is when we think of agile manufacturing. When we discuss more agile process for manufacturing, we're combining a variety of technologies that will form integrated, seamless exchange of information, linking retailers and suppliers to the manufacturing facility so that all information is accessible and workable within the flow of goods. Another important aspect to production processes is quality assurance. And excuse me for just a second. All right, thank you so much. Sorry about that. So when we think about quality assurance, every single manufacturer that you work with needs to hold a level of standard, not only for themselves in terms of, the quality of work that they put out into the market, and a lot of this is negotiated on contracts when you sign up to work with a particular vendor, but also the brand. should have a level of standardization when it comes to their product being manufactured and sold to their intended customer. So it's a dual exchange of responsibility when it comes to quality assurance. And it's really about, again, like I said, the standards that are set forth by the brand, but also the manufacturer that you're working with need to have those standards in place. Otherwise, they're not going to get the contracts from the retailers when the retailer is seeking a new vendor to work with. So when we think about quality assurance, we're talking really about the quality of the garment, the fit of the garment, the ease of the garment, the quality of sewing and construction. This can include the stitch type, length, the tension of the stitch, the seam, the seam. Is there top stitching? Are there turned edges? Is there a buttonhole? And is the buttonhole accuracy stitched appropriately for the proportion of the button in relation to where the placket on the shirt is? This can also extend into hems and even plaids when you're working with multiple plaids and matching plaids. But it also speaks to trims and notions and details of the garment. So, quality of thread, quality of buttons, zippers, types of snaps that are used, elastic, anything that is being used to put the finished garment together needs to be assessed based on standards of quality and quality assurance. And so that is a big factor when you think about production processes and considerations for that. And then finally, when we think about kind of auxiliary level agents that support the production, of your supply chain overall, there are many individuals and or companies that kind of take on an auxiliary level of role to help facilitate the flow of goods as well as likely the sale of goods. So to start, we look at in-house or independent sales reps. So these individuals will be hired either to work for the company or they will be contracted for the sale of the line by an independent sales agent. Excuse me. And ultimately, their role is to facilitate the sale of the product to the client being the retailer. And their terms of what they're responsible for will be based upon, you know, the territory that they're, responsible for. So if that's, the West Coast, the East Coast, if it's the entire US market, um, and then they essentially would, you know, either work in the either work in the showroom or go on the road to sell the line to potential fashion retailers. And then based on how much they sell per purchase order, they would earn a particular commission. Average commission is usually about 30%, 30 to 40% is typical for the industry standard. And so, they of course are being paid for their contract term, timeline, or if they're in-house, they're already getting some sort of salary, but then they get a commission based on how many orders that they write. So that's something to be aware of. They may also, in certain circumstances, especially when you're working with vendors in other parts of the world, you might have to deal with what's called an export agent. So export agents facilitate the export of products from wherever the product is being produced. So like, for example, earlier I made the mention of China or India. So you would work directly with an export agent to get the product over successfully into the US market. You might also need to consider a freight forwarding company. that helps to facilitate the shipment of goods from the country where the goods are being produced to the countries where they're being sold. So if you need it to go on a, cargo ship into a container being properly, loaded on, shipped properly, protected, all of those things. And then another important individual and or company that will be useful is when goods enter the US market, likely you will need to hire what's called a customs broker. This is an agent that is hired by whatever the retailer is or the company that is seeking the international product, to make sure that their product gets to where it needs to be in the US. And they also work with customs to ensure that it's cleared on time, uh, and all paperwork is accurate so that it can clear customs on time. So that's something to be aware of in terms of additional agents that help to support the flow of goods within your supply chain. And that concludes our discussion on Chapter 12. Thanks so much for listening.